여러분, 안녕하세요. 진주라고 합니다. During last weekend's Zoom study session, I was actually asked if I can compile a list of all the Korean pronunciation rules into a post on the study library Discord server, so it would be easier for learners to reference. But I felt it would be better to do a video, that way I can demonstrate what these sound like in practice. I want to preface this by clarifying that, like you, I'm still learning Korean, so I'm in no way qualified to teach Korean. However, I do enjoy sharing my knowledge that I learned through my own studies. So with that, let's get started. So 3 years of studying at a Korean language program, and I actually had no idea that these pronunciation rules existed. Even when I've asked native Korean speakers, it was just assumed that specific vocabulary words had a certain pronunciation compared to others. I thought maybe there were exceptions to pronunciation, but I wasn't aware that these were standard rules that apply across the board. That is until I started retaking Korean from level 1 at my college in order to gain college credit, and my teacher actually went over these rules with us. So today I will be going over 9 pronunciation rules which you probably never knew existed in Korean. I recommend watching this only after you've learned the Korean alphabet and have an normal or an idea of what normal Korean pronunciation sounds like, since these rules are specific rules in order to make your pronunciation sound more fluent, and requires a basic foundation of Korean in order to not get confused or overwhelmed. The first rule I'll be covering is actually one that is most commonly seen throughout Korean, and this one is called resyllabification. I'll start off each rule by giving some examples in which you can see these rules, and then we'll break it down together. You can see resyllabification in the following word. 책을. 책 meaning book, and being the object particle. So in this example, if you were to read it just as it is written, you could pronounce it 책 and 책. Following the basic pronunciation rules, when 기역 is in the 받침 or final consonant, it becomes a hard k sound. However, because the syllable is followed by an ing in the beginning of the next syllable, the placement of ing at the beginning of the syllable makes it silent, which then the final consonant of the prior syllable carries over and replaces that silent character. I hope that makes sense. A few other examples would be 밖에, 밖 meaning outside, and 에 being the location particle. So 밖 and 에. 밖에 is read as 밖에. 있어요 meaning to exist. It and 어요, you wouldn't pronounce it as 있어요. Since that doesn't have flow, it's read as 있어요. Resyllabification only pertains to syllables which have a final consonant and a silent ing at the beginning of the following syllable. Now, rule number 2 is called nasal assimilation. I believe this one is pointed out by beginners most often and frequently confuses beginners because it can be so noticeable. I know it did for me when I very first started learning Korean as well. It can be seen in 감사합니다, meaning thank you. If you were to pronounce it as written, it would be 감사합니다. So I'll start this one off by explaining that mium and nian are considered nasal consonants. In order to maintain flow in the pronunciation, instead of pronouncing biup as a hard p sound, the flow is maintained by changing it to a sound. So instead of 감사합니다, you get 감사합니다. Now, for nasal assimilation, not all 받침 or final consonants will change to mium. So these are the other changes you can see under this rule. biup and piup are pronounced as mium. For example, 한 입만 meaning just one bite. 한 입만. 입만 is pronounced as 입만. 한 입만. 앞문 meaning front door. 앞 and 문 up moon is pronounced as amun. Next, digut, tiut, shiut, sangshiut, jiut, chiut, and hiut are pronounced as nian. For example, 끝나다 meaning to end, 끝 and 나다. 끝 나다 is pronounced as 끝나다. 몇 년, 몇 meaning how many, 년 meaning years, 몇 and 년, 몇 년 is pronounced as 몇 년. And finally, 기억, 기역, and 상기역 are pronounced as iung. Now, in these instances, because we're talking about the final consonant, the iung sound will be ng. For example, 한국말, meaning Korean or Korean words, 한국 and 말. 한국 말 is pronounced as 한국말. So nasal assimilation is only applied to final consonants which are followed by mium or nian in the beginning of the next syllable. And they can either change to mium, nian, or iung based on which consonant is in the 받침. I hope that makes sense. The third pronunciation rule I'll be covering is called tensification. Tensification can be seen in the following word. 학교, meaning school. 학 and 교. 학교 is pronounced as 학교. Now, this one isn't as noticeable and may be a little more difficult to pinpoint if you're a beginner, but the giok in the 받침 is slightly muted, so it wouldn't make the normal hard k sound, while the giok in the second syllable is pronounced with some tension. So instead of gyo, it's pronounced as gyo. It's definitely still a bit hard for me to pronounce as well, so don't be discouraged if you can't tell the difference. Even in normal conversations, the double consonants aren't super noticeable, so it's okay if you can't pronounce it exactly. It won't make much of a difference in normal conversation. Some other examples would be 숙제, meaning homework, 숙 and 제. 숙제 is pronounced as 숙제. 식당, meaning restaurant, 식 and 당. 식당 is pronounced as 식당. 책상, meaning desk, 책 and 상. 책상 is pronounced as 책상. 있습니다, the honorific form of 있다, to be. 있습니다. 있습니다 is pronounced as 있습니다. Don't forget the nasal assimilation on the biup as well. So tensification occurs when the final consonant, or 받침, is a plain plosive or a fricative consonant and is followed by another plosive or fricative consonant in the beginning of the next syllable. A plain plosive consonant is a consonant which is made by the stopping of airflow. For example, in Korean, these consonants are biup, digut, jiut, and giok. B, d, j, g. As you can tell, you have to slightly stop airflow. There's a slight pause which helps create these sounds. A fricative consonant is a consonant made by friction, created by pushing air through a narrow opening. So in Korean, this consonant would be shiu, s, s. The small opening in between your teeth and tongue creates the sound by causing friction. Rule number 4 is called aspiration. Aspiration can be seen in the following example. 어떻게, meaning how. 어떻 and 게. 어떻게 is pronounced as 어떻게. When the 받침 is hiet and is followed by a plain plosive consonant, so biup, digut, jiut, or giok, hiet combines with the plosive consonant and creates an aspirated consonant. So biup turns to piup, digut turns to tiut, jiut turns to chiut, and giok turns to kiuk. Some other examples include 책하고, 책 again meaning book, and 하고 being a connective particle. 책 and 하고. 책하고 is pronounced as 책하고. 시작해요 meaning to begin. 시작 and 해요. 시작해요 is pronounced as 시작해요. Now, rule number 4 kind of ties into rule number 5 in that it involves hiet. This rule is called hiet weakening. Hiet weakening can be seen in the following. 안녕하세요, meaning hello. 안녕 and 하세요. 안녕하세요 is pronounced as 안녕하세요. When hiet falls between any combination of vowels, 를 or the nasal consonants, 미음, 니은, and 이응, hiet becomes silent. Some other examples of this would be 전화해요, meaning to make a call. 전 and 화해요. 전화해요 is pronounced as 전화해요. 좋아요, meaning to be good. Looking at each syllable separately, the pronunciation would be 촉 and 아요. 촉, 아요, but it's pronounced as 좋아요. 천천히, meaning slowly. 천천 and 히. 천천, 히 is pronounced as 천천히. So this applies when hiet falls between any vowels, 를, or the nasal consonants, and it doesn't matter whether hiet falls in the batjim or the beginning of the syllable. It will always be weakened or completely silent. Rule number 6 is called double consonant reduction. This can be seen in the following example. 읽어요, meaning to read. 읽 and 어요. 읽어요 is pronounced as 읽어요. This one ties into the resyllabification rule that we covered first. When there's two consonants in the batjim and an iung follows at the beginning of the next syllable, only the second consonant in the batjim will transfer over, or be resyllabificated to the beginning of the next syllable. This can also be seen in 없어요, to not exist. up and 어요. 없어요 is pronounced as 없어요. 앉아요, to sit. 안 and 아요. 안아요 is pronounced as 앉아요. Now, I'm sure you've noticed that I'm not pronouncing the second consonant in the batjim when saying each individual syllable, and that is because the second consonant becomes silent if there's no other syllable following, or if it comes before a consonant in the next syllable. So we can see this especially in the dictionary forms of each word. For example, the words we just covered, 읽어요 in dictionary form is 읽다, pronounced like 읽다. 없어요 in dictionary form is 없다, pronounced like 없다. 앉아요 in dictionary form is 앉다, pronounced like 앉다. So if two consonants exist in the batjim, the second one will either be omitted or resyllabificated. I know it's been a long journey, but we're almost there. Rule number 7 is pretty simple compared to some of the other rules. It's called niên to lir assimilation. This can be seen in 설날, which is the Korean New Year. 설 and 날, 설날 is pronounced as 설날. When niên and lir are back to back, niên is pronounced as lir. This can be seen in 신뢰, meaning reliance or trust. 신 and 뢰. 신뢰 is pronounced as 신뢰. 전라도, a province in Korean. 전라도. 전라도 is pronounced as 전라도. 연락해요, meaning to contact. 연락해요. 연락해요 is pronounced as 연락해요. Remember the aspiration rule? So when you see niên and lir next to each other, just remember that niên is pronounced as lir. Rule number 8 is actually pretty optional and isn't a standard rule, but you'll commonly come across it in casual speech. This rule is called place assimilation. Sometimes diet can be pronounced as biup if it comes before another biup or sangbiup, and giok if it comes before another giok and sanggiok. For this example, I want you to follow me very, very closely because it will get a little complicated. 꽃병, meaning vase. 꽃병, because the batjim is tiet and is followed by another plosive consonant, the pronunciation changes to 꽃병 by following the rule of intensification. Now you have the option to use the place assimilation rule and pronounce this as 꽃병. I know this rule is very complicated, but I'll show you another example. 갖고, kat meaning the past tense of go, and 고 being a connection particle. Again, has the intensification rule applied to it, which then changes 갖고 to 갖고. Now because 상기역 follows 디귿, you can pronounce this as 갖고 by following the place assimilation rule. This rule can be applied to ni은, which is pronounced as mium if it is followed by bi읍, 상비읍, or another mium, and is pronounced as 기역 if it falls before another 기역 and 상기역. For example, 빗물, meaning rainwater, 빗물 changes to 빗물 due to nasal assimilation. And now, since the final consonant is ni은 and is followed by a mium, you can pronounce this word naturally as 빗물. 한강, meaning Han River, 한강, can be pronounced as 한강. But again, this is an optional rule per se. However, I feel like this may be something that comes naturally after learning Korean for a while. And finally, our last rule. Rule number 9 is called palatalization. This rule can be seen in the word 같이, meaning together, kat and e. kat-i is pronounced as 같이. In palatalization, if the batjim is 디귿 or tiet, and is followed by the vowels i, 여, ya, yo, or you, the di귿 is pronounced as jiet, and the tiet is pronounced as tiet. There's not many examples for this one that I can think of, but I'm sure you can understand this one. Alright, great job everyone! Finally we made it. Since you have made it this far, I'll throw in a little bonus pronunciation rule. 의, which is the possessive particle, is commonly pronounced as 에. So if I were to say 우리 칸가지의 공이에요, the possessive particle isn't pronounced as 의, but 에. This only applies if the syllable falls in the middle or the end of the word. However, if I were to say 의미, you always pronounce it as 의. 제 비디오를 봐서 정말 감사합니다. 좋은 하루 되세요, 여러분. 바이바이.